You're listening to the School Leadership Reimagined podcast, episode 332. How do builders like us make a dramatic difference in the lives of our students in spite of all the obstacles we face? How do you keep your vision for your school from being held hostage by resistant teachers, uncooperative parents, ridiculous district policies, or a lack of time, money, or resources? If you're facing those challenges right now, here's where you'll find the answers, strategies, and actionable tips you need to overcome any obstacle you face. You don't have to wait to make a difference in the lives of the people you serve. You can turn your school into a success story right now with the people and resources you already have. Let's get started. Hey builders, welcome to another episode of the School Leadership Reimagined podcast. I'm your host, Robin Jackson, and today I have a voice. It's not 100%, but it's back. Last time we did a rewind because I had no voice at all. I am on the mend, and so there's a voice, and I've missed talking to you. And so I'm hopping on here today because I want to talk about a phenomenon that I've noticed. Now, you've heard me in the past talk about the October surprise. We all know what that is, right? That thing that throws you off track in October. It usually happens around October. I don't know why. Maybe it's the month of Halloween. I don't know. But there's always something, some curveball that comes your way, usually right about now, that can throw you off your game. So I've talked about that in the past. And as bad as that October surprise can be, at this point, we kind of know that it's coming. And as builders, we're ready for it. The more that you put solid things in place, the more equipped you are to handle the October surprise so that it's not even that much of a surprise anymore. So I'm not talking about the October surprise. Today, I want to talk to you about something much more insidious than the October surprise. This is not a curveball that happens. This is something that's happening right now under the surface in most schools. And what makes it so insidious is that you kind of feel like something's off, but you don't really know what it is. And you don't even start to experience the results of what's happening now until January, long after there's anything you can do about it. And it's one of the reasons why January and February and March feel so hard, because of something that starts happening this month, right now, at this point in the school year. I call it the October drift. And today, I want to talk to you about the October drift. I've noticed that the October drift follows a very specific pattern. And so I want to lay out what that pattern is so that you can not only recognize it, but you can break it. You can break it now and keep it from pulling you off course from your 100% vision so that this year you can actually have the year that you were meant to have and build the school that you're trying so hard to build. So let's talk about the October drift. The October drift has 5 parts. There are 5 parts to the pattern. So the first thing that you have to understand is that the drift isn't random. It's not random at all. In fact, it's very designed, right? So what happens is that schools are built on urgency cycles, right? So you have benchmark testing. And so you go to the benchmark and then you scramble really hard with the results, studying results, and you go to the next benchmark. There are all kinds of deadlines. Testing drives your calendar or grading drives your calendar. And because of that, there are these peaks and then there are these valleys, right? And it's during the valleys, in between the peaks, that's where the opportunity to drift happens, because the default setting for the school system is that we're going to have these peaks and valleys, and therefore you have drifts. And if you don't intentionally create these reset points during the times of the valleys, then drift is going to happen no matter how hard you try. And so what builders do is, first of all, we recognize that drift is there. It's always there. And October is one of those valley months, right? We have the peak of back to school. October, we start going into the valley. At the end of October, so around November, we get our first set of grades, and then we go back up to a peak. And then there's holidays coming, and we go back into the valley. And then we go January. So we know the pattern of the school year. And during those times where we have those valleys, those in-between times, that's when we are most susceptible to drifting. And if we don't intentionally build resets in during those valley times, we will drift. It's just inevitable. It's the way the system works. So the first part of the pattern of drift is that it usually happens during the valleys. And the way that you break that pattern is you have to put intentional resets during the valleys. October is the first big valley that we face, and this is a time for a reset. The second part of the drift pattern, the thing that has us kind of start drifting off course, and it's imperceptible at first, right? So when you first start drifting in October, it feels like, oh, I can quickly get back on track. But it's not so easy, right? And what happens, the second thing that happens that perpetuates this drift is that the story that your school is telling starts to change. So at the beginning of the year, you try to reset the story, right? That's one of those big peak times, right? So you do your back to school speech. You talk about what this year is going to be. You try to remind people about the bigger why that is driving this work. And somewhere around October, that story starts to shift and change because nobody remembers your speech at this point. You probably don't even remember your speech. Nobody remembers that back to school excitement. We are now in the middle of the school year, and it's a long time before we get to the end of it. And so your school improvement plan or that big speech you gave at the beginning of the year, it's no longer driving the story of your school. Now there's another subtle story that's starting to take over. Some of that is, oh, I'm really tired already. Some of that is, oh, we're not doing as well as we thought we could be doing. Some of it is, oh, we just need to get to survive till testing. Some of that story is, oh, it's a long time till December. And that narrative is starting to creep in to the overall story that your school is telling. And that narrative is starting to take over. And so what you'll see is you'll start to see that you're having to repeat yourself more. You'll see that you're starting to make compromises on the way that you intended to do things this year. And you think it's just a one-time compromise, and then next time we do it, we'll be back on track and we'll do it the right way. But that compromise becomes the default without even realizing it. Conversations start changing around this time. And at the beginning of the year, there's this moment where we are in front of people and we are sharing a story and people are eager to hear it. What is the story of the year going to be? How is this year going to be different? But in October, where our PD is like, we're rushing to get stuff done. There's often a district mandate that's come in last minute that you're scrambling to try to, address. So that's taking over your PD time and your staff meeting time. And so you'll start to hear this undercurrent of a story. And that story is starting to shift your culture. Your culture is starting to drift off. It always happens around this time. We know the pattern. So how do we break it? Well, this is the time in October to start sharing your vision story again. You shared it at the beginning, and that's not enough, right? The vision story has to keep being repeated. Remember, whoever controls your narrative controls your culture. And right now, without you even realizing it, there are some underlying narratives that are starting to take control of your culture. You got to pay attention to it. Not only do you need to pay attention to it, now is your time to take back over the narrative. So in office hours, we've been talking a lot about this in BU because principals are starting to see that, the people who always come in and bring the negativity into your culture, they're starting to hear rumblings of their stories. It always happens this time of year, but it happens because we are not being intentional about recapturing the narrative. And we get, can I say it? We get a little lazy around October. Part of it is because September is so busy that October we're just like, whew. But you can't afford to get lazy about the school story. If you haven't repeated your vision story this week, you need to do it. If you haven't taken time to create your vision story, you need to write it. If you aren't paying attention to the underlying narratives that are starting to take place and you aren't intentionally reframing those narratives in your 100% vision, be careful, because those narratives are just going to gain momentum until they overtake the narrative that you're trying to tell. And then you have to work twice as hard to undo it in January, in February, in March. So now is the time to go back to why we're here, to go back to what are we building, to go back to why that's so important and the role that we all must play in doing that. If you have not done your vision, your mission, and your core values, now's the time. Now's the time. And if you have done them, now's the time to reinforce it. So, what does that look like? It looks like telling your vision story again. What does it look like? It looks like reminding people about the core values that are non-negotiable in your building and reinforcing those. What does it look like? It looks like making sure that everything you do in the school is anchored in your mission, that you're not doing anything that is even slightly off mission. What does it look like? It looks like auditing the actions that you take and making sure that those actions are reinforcing the story that you're trying to tell. What does that look like? It looks like talking to parents and reminding parents about the vision, mission, and core values and helping parents figure out the role that they play in that process before they start making up roles for themselves. So now is the time to reinforce that narrative because we're in one of those valley periods. And if you don't do it now, what'll happen is another narrative begins to take over your culture and start pulling your culture ever so slightly at this point. But you'll start to see it later on in January, it starts pulling your culture a little bit off track. Okay. So number one, you have to be intentional about the understanding the pattern that you got to get a valley. And so you have to put resets in those valleys or you begin to drift. Number two, you got to pay attention to the narrative because when you start to drift, the narrative is one of the first things that starts to drift. You got to be intentional about recapturing control of your narrative and reinforcing your vision, mission, and core values during this time. Number three, a lot of times when you begin to drift, what happens is because you lose sight of your clarity, people are forced to rely on their own commitment, and that gets old, right? So I always like to say that when clarity erodes, commitment doesn't matter. If you are not clear about what you are doing, then people's commitment will not matter because even though your staff may still be working hard right now, if you don't give them clarity, their commitment will begin to erode. And this is why most motivation strategies fail because you're trying to motivate people because you think it's just about the energy, when in reality, it's about the clarity. So at the beginning of the year, you shared your vision story. You got people all excited about that. Maybe you even had a one plan and you shared your one plan with your staff. But they hear that at the beginning of the school year, but they haven't gotten into the school year yet. So now it's time to go back and to help people get clear about the work that they're doing. It might mean that you need to put some systems in place. It might mean that if you don't have a one plan, then you need to put a one plan in place so that people understand how you're going to get to your vision. This is the time when you need to get clear. Because here's what happens in October. In September and August, when you are just starting, people are really excited. And they're excited about the idea, but the school year is still a concept at that point. In October is when stuff starts getting real. And so that vision, mission, and core values that you talked about in August and September, they understand it conceptually, but they may not understand how it applies to their day-to-day work. October is a perfect time to help people see that. And so if you are not doing that, if you're not creating that clarity, what happens is people may still be committed, but the work feels all over the place. People still may be committed, but they're working hard and it feels like they're spinning their wheels. This is the time to come in and give them clarity. So you're not just continuing to reinforce the story, but you're also giving them clarity about how the story impacts their day-to-day work. And that's what makes that so powerful. They need both. They need the story, but they also need clarity as well. All right. So pattern number one, it's not random. Drift happens. It follows a predictable pattern. And we need to put intentional resets in those dips in order to keep us from drifting. Two, this is the time you need to be taking care of the story because if not, the hidden narrative will overtake your culture. Number three, when clarity erodes, commitment doesn't matter. So it's not about people's commitment. It's not about people being motivated. It's about giving them clarity. Okay. Number four, you're always working in two modes. You're either pursuing your vision or you're going into default mode. Right. And what happens is that the rush of daily demands and the idea of like, we just got to get through the day takes over, and you go into default mode and you lose sight of your vision. Right. And so again, this is why the reset is so important. You got to help people snap out of that default mode and get back to doing the work that is intentionally moving us towards our vision. Default, you're always fighting default, and default creates drift. So if you allow people to just go in default mode and you are not intentionally focusing that work on the vision, they will drift. And then finally, when you allow drift, it undermines your influence. And so what happens is when you allow drift to start happening and you say, I'll just get back to it later, then what happens is that you begin to repeat yourself. And every time you repeat yourself and nothing changes, people stop believing you, the trust that they have in you and in your vision begins to erode. Anytime you get distracted from your vision, you teach people you don't mean what you really are saying. You don't mean it. And so people stop trusting you, and they start slow walking you. And when they start slow walking you, you get mad and you think, oh, they don't care. No, you taught them how to slow walk you because you weren't consistent. You started out in September, we're going to really do this year. You allowed yourself to get distracted. And so by October, you're no longer talking about it. You're just getting through the day. You're no longer moving forward. The stuff you said you were going to do this year, you kind of have let lapse a little bit. And what people who are always watching you learn from that is you don't mean what you say. What you say in September is evaporated by October. So next year, why am I even getting started? Because I already know you're going to get distracted by October and chase the next shiny object. And so I'm not going to even invest. That's why it's really important at this point in the school year to do a reset and get back to your vision, to let people know the vision didn't get eclipsed by all of the stuff that we went through doing back to school in September and getting school started. The vision is still here and it's still driving everything we do. Otherwise, you're just teaching people not to trust you. Here's the point, that the drift follows a very predictable pattern. And we don't just see it in schools, we see it in our lives. I mean, listen, earlier this year, I was like, I'm going to get healthy. I'm going to eat healthy. And I did. I shifted, how I ate and made sure that I was eating more healthy, that I was getting my rest, that I was getting to bed on time. And then I had a huge amount of travel over the summer. And so what started happening is my healthy habits that I worked so hard to establish and that I was feeling the benefits of began to drift, right? It started very simple. Like I was at an airport and I was like, oh, well, there was a candy that I used to like, when I was a kid. And I was like, I haven't had that in a long time. And I bought it as an impulse buy at the register. Then I snacked on it. And then I was like, well, that's kind of good. And then next time I didn't see that particular candy, but I was like, I need a little something sweet for the long flight ahead. And then I put another piece of candy in. And before long, I have a handful of candy in my backpack at all times, and I'm constantly snacking on that. And then after a while, I was like, oh, this is so sweet. I need something salty. And so I started getting chips and candy for the long flights. And I would tell myself, well, it's just for this flight. It's not like I eat like this every day. But when I'm traveling every day, that's exactly how I eat. Plus, I would get in late and I'd be hungry, and then I'd grab something on the way into the hotel, or I eat in the airport, and you already know how bad for you airport food is, or I get so busy that I wouldn't pack an apple in my backpack for a snack. And so then when on the plane, when they say, here's some Biscoff cookies, listen, I don't even like Biscoff cookies that much, but I'd eat one because of the boredom of just a long flight. And just, over time, it wasn't one decision. I didn't go from eating healthy to give me a Big Mac, 2 fries, and an apple pie. I didn't do that. It was just a slow drift. And before I knew it, my eating habits were garbage. And I felt awful. And then I looked up at the scale and like, when did I get this weight? And it wasn't like it came overnight, but it was just a drift. And because I wasn't paying attention, because I wasn't being intentional, because I went to default mode, because I started making tiny little choices that began to add up, by the end of the summer, I was in a completely different state. The same thing happens to your school. And now is when it starts. Drift is not something that we should be surprised about. It follows a predictable pattern. It starts because we know there are highs and lows in the school year, and October is our first dip. And so if we're not intentional about resetting in October, then that drift starts to take us further and further off course. And we look up in January and we're like, how did we get here? Well, I can tell you how you got here. October, right? The second thing that happens is during those dips, the narrative of your story, of the school story, subtly starts to shift. And if you are not intentional about taking over control of the narrative right now, you will see the drift, and other people's stories begin to take over your culture. Then once the narrative starts to drift, the next thing that happens is clarity begins to slip. And when clarity begins to slip, people only have their commitment to rely on, and their commitment begins to wear out. So while it looks like people are working really hard right now in October, and they are, if you don't provide that clarity for people, they're working hard, but they're spinning their wheels. And that is going to get exhausting very quickly. And it's going to show up in January. People are going to be exhausted in January. And we're going to think, well, it's just natural. It's that part of the school year. It's not natural. It's not natural. That exhaustion started now because people had to run on their own commitment because you weren't giving them the clarity they needed to do the work and see results. Okay. And the next thing that happens is that when people start getting tired, they start slipping into default mode, and default mode starts to take over, and people stop working towards your vision and just get through the day. And the last thing that happens is that you also start to slip into default mode. And so you're not talking about your vision. You're not working towards your vision. And as a result, you begin to undermine your own influence. You've taught people that you don't mean what you say. And when people pick that up for their own survival, they stop listening to you. And so if you feel like you are starting to repeat yourself now, wait till January. Because if you are not resetting and getting things on track and continuing to come back to where you said you were heading this year, if you're not aligning that work, then you are teaching people not to believe what you say, and they stop listening. And in January, when you say, hey, we're going to get back on track, you can't get anybody moving, and you don't understand why. I'm going to tell you why right now. It's because of what's happening here in October. So drift follows a pattern, but the good news is you can break that pattern. And that's what we're going to do in the October reset. Now, we're getting started on Sunday. So if you're listening to this in real time, we are starting Sunday at 7 p.m. We're going to go Sunday, Monday, Tuesday. And we're going to meet together for 1 hour each day. And we're going to take this drift pattern, and I'm going to show you how to break the pattern. And so each day we're going to be doing something very, very intentional to reset. We're going to reset you on day 1. We're going to reset your staff on day 2. We're going to reset your plan on day 3. That's it. So 3 days, every day. First day, we're going to get you back into game mode, get you refocused, you re-energized. Day 2, we're going to talk about how do you get your staff re-energized, give you some very specific things you can do. And then on day 3, we're going to show you how, if you've gotten away from your plan hasn't quite gotten off the ground yet the way you want to do it, how do you reignite your plan? How do you get your plan reset so that you can still get something done before you go home for break? And so you start January just with momentum instead of, trying to, pick up the pieces in January. So the October reset, it's absolutely free. It's something we're doing inside of Buildership University in the collective for our folks. But I do have some free tickets for those of you who are not in BU in the collective. And you need to go to buildershipuniversity.com/reset. buildershipuniversity.com/reset. Grab one of those free tickets. We only have a limited amount because we are, this was designed for people in BU and the collective. But if you want to grab one of those free tickets, go to that link. If we still have tickets available, you'll see them. If you don't see any tickets available, it means that they've all been given away. And if not, then you'll be able to join. Hopefully you'll join us for the next one. But if it's still open and there's still tickets available, grab one. Let's get together. It's absolutely free, and let's do a reset. Whether you join me or not for the reset, here's the thing that I want you to keep in mind: the drift happens every October. but it's not inevitable. There's something you can do to stop it, but you have to be intentional. You can't just assume that it's going to, well, it happens. It's just a part of the school year and accept it. You have to be intentional about stopping the drift. And you can do it when you understand the pattern and you are very intentional and deliberate about breaking that pattern like a builder. I'll talk to you next time. Hey, if you're ready to get started being a builder right away, then I want to invite you to join us at Buildership University. It's our exclusive online community for builders just like you, where you'll be able to get the exact training that you need to turn your school into a success story right now with the people and resources you already have. Inside, you'll find our best online courses, live trainings with me, tons of resources, templates, and exemplars, and monthly live office hours with me where you can ask me anything and get my help on whatever challenge you're facing right now. If you're tired of hitting obstacle after obstacle and you're sick of tiny little incremental gains each year, if you're ready to make a dramatic difference in your school right now, then you need to join Buildership University. Just go to buildershipuniversity.com and get started writing your school success story today.